y el Grupo de Investigación de Economía Circular y Desarrollo Sostenible. Agradecemos su presencia y damos inicio a la conferencia Evaluating Local and Regional Waste Policy a cargo del profesor Simon de Jaeger. El profesor Simon, asociado a la Universidad KU Leuven, a la Facultad de Economía y al Grupo de Investigación Empresarial CEDOM, centra su investigación en la evaluación ex post de políticas públicas en el ámbito de la economía circular y la valoración de externalidades medioambientales. La siguiente conferencia se dictará en inglés y al final del evento realizaremos un resumen con los principales key points de la presentación. A continuación, el ingeniero Paul Vanegas, director del Grupo de Investigación de Economía Circular y Desarrollo Sostenible, dará unas palabras de bienvenida.
Buenas tardes y muchas gracias por la asistencia. Es un privilegio para nosotros dar la bienvenida el día de hoy al profesor Simon de Jaeger. Él es un profesor de la Universidad Católica de Lovaina, en la parte norte de Bélgica, que ha trabajado intensamente en los últimos años sobre estrategias de economía circular, principalmente para la parte norte de Bélgica, la parte flamenca. Además de esto, su área de investigación también hace evaluaciones de políticas ambientales, de generación de residuos, de la misma manera para la parte norte de Bélgica. En el Ecuador, Simon es el director del proyecto de investigación que trabajamos junto con la Católica de Lovaina, en donde analizamos estrategias de economía circular, pero ya asentadas a nuestra realidad local, asentadas a Latinoamérica. En esto hemos trabajado ya por un poco más de 4 años y hemos tenido la oportunidad de traducir algunas de estas implementaciones, las estrategias que se utilizan en Bélgica, a nuestro contexto local. Y ese es el valor que tienen estas colaboraciones de investigación, en donde podemos entender cómo ciertos aspectos, ciertos retos relacionados con la sostenibilidad, como por ejemplo la economía circular, debería ser adaptada y no copiada de lo que se hace en otras realidades. Con el profesor de Jaeger hemos trabajado no solamente en evaluar ambientalmente, sino también económica y socialmente las estrategias de economía circular que tienen y cobran sentido para nuestras realidades. Es un placer también que nos acompañen ustedes. Debo agradecer también la presencia del señor decano de la Facultad de Ciencias Económicas. Y estos son el tipo de colaboraciones y cosas que desde la facultad también se están impulsando y están apoyándose para que los estudiantes se beneficien de experiencias de otros lados. También quisiera agradecer a la profesora Lefa Capello por apoyar esas iniciativas y permitir que estudiantes de la facultad tengan acceso a este tipo de charlas. Sin más, quisiera dar paso ahora al profesor para que nos dé la charla acerca de cómo se deberían evaluar estas políticas regionales y locales acerca de la gestión de residuos. Muchas gracias.
Simon, welcome, and you are in charge right now. You have microphone here? No, it's here. And
okay. Good afternoon, and well, thank you for having me. So, dear colleagues, dear students, it's very nice to see that you turned up. Before we start, if it's okay for you guys, I would like to know my audience. Won't ask you to introduce yourself, of course, but it would be nice to know from which faculties you are. So, could you just raise your hand if you're from the Faculty of Economics? So just. Okay. Okay, most of them. Okay. And then some of the others are from environmental engineering. Okay. And the others? Do I miss some faculties here? So these are the 2 groups. Okay. Well, good. I'm an economist. But for the others, if I use some terminology that you're not familiar with, of course, do interrupt me during the lecture. It's not a problem at all, of course. So I would like to talk to you for the next 40 minutes or so about this evaluating local policy, but I hope that it will be some kind of interaction as well between me and you. So you can ask me questions even during the presentation, so just raise your hand and ask the question you have, of course. I have some questions for you as well, if that is okay. So I will start with the first question, something you can think about, and maybe afterwards or during the presentation we can then discuss the question that I have. And the first one is actually related to one of the first topics that I want to discuss with you. I will talk in a minute about incentives for at-home sorting of waste. I will explain the details about it. But in Belgium, in Flanders, the most incentives for at-home sorting of waste, this means that you, for instance, decide to put recyclable materials apart and use the non-recyclable materials in a different bag, for instance, and you pay for it, then it's taken away and incinerated. I will talk about it in a minute. But there are mainly financial incentives for the households to do so in Flanders. And if you think about it, most scholars, and I'm not most, but many scholars, and I'm not one of them to be honest, but many scholars say, okay, you have these systems where you have like weight-based pricing, I'll explain it in a minute, and volume-based pricing systems, and we should try to implement these systems in other countries as well. So the systems that are used, for instance, in Western European countries and in the United States, we should use it in other countries as well. But I'm not convinced that is actually true. If you look at current evolutions, and I was here, for instance, some months ago, and had the privilege to meet some of the local informal recyclers, and what I saw was that indeed it's their form of livelihood. I understand that, of course, so that is interesting. But I also saw some kind of pride of being part of the system and doing something good for the planet, doing something good for their environment. And of course, this is something, if you take over a system that exists in another country and you implement it here in Ecuador, for instance, you lose this part, of course. And my idea is, okay, this pride, this thing that you do something for the environment, I'm afraid that we will lose this in Belgium, for instance, the country where I'm from, if we just keep on following the current evolutions. For instance, if we would say now, okay, there is new technology coming, where sorting at home is probably in the near future no longer necessary. You just put all your waste in one bag and it's then sorted automatically. Yeah, at that time, what happens then, you don't have an incentive to sort it anymore. But if you sort at home, you can imagine people do it as well because they like to sort at home, because they know they're doing something good for the environment. If you take that away, the question is, okay, the sense of pride, the social values that you create here by letting people working for the environment, this will disappear in Flanders, I think. And my question then is, instead of saying we should introduce systems from Flanders in Ecuador, let's look at it the other way around. And my question is, how can we make sure that this form of pride, this form of doing something good for the environment, can be implemented back in, for instance, Flanders, Belgium, or other countries, where we fear that it's going to be lost in the near future. So, of course, we cannot say, okay, informal recycling is again reinstated in Belgium. That would not work. But do you have other ideas how we can, make that these kind of things that these other motivations for doing something good for the environment will return to some of the European countries? So, what I will do is, before we start this discussion, of course, I will first explain what the incentives are in just one case in Flanders and how we can evaluate if these incentives work. And I'm talking about financial incentives. I will explain step by step. Then I will go to evaluating incineration taxes, and then I'm talking about, not about household waste, but I will talk about industrial waste. And if I have time left, I hope so, but I'm afraid it will not be the case, I would like to talk about benchmarking as well. These are three cases where we evaluate actually local and regional policies and check how we can evaluate actually these policies and what the methodologies are. I can say now that during this lecture, of course, it's not my intention to go into the technical details of all these different estimation techniques. I'm not going to talk about all the regression techniques. I'm not going to talk about the optimization techniques. That's not the goal of today's talk. So let's start with the first one, incentives for at-home sort. So to make sure that we're on the same page, that we understand each other, this is about what I will call residual waste. So residual waste, and it's not an official term, it's just a term that I'm used today. Residual waste is all waste, and I'm talking about household waste. Okay.
Apaga la luz de ella para que esté más clarito.
Okay, so I'm talking about residual waste, and I'm talking about household waste in this case. So, yeah, that's much better. Yeah. So, household waste, residual household waste is all waste that is not collected separately for recycling purposes. For instance, when you collect plastic packaging waste for recycling purposes, you put it aside. But as a household, you will also have some flow left over that cannot be recycled, that cannot be reused. In Flanders, what happens with it, it's collected separately. You put it on the curbside, it's collected door to door, and then it's incinerated with energy recuperation. So they burn it and they generate electricity with it. This is the least preferred option in Flanders. They want, of course, that you recycle as much as possible, and of course they want that you actually produce as less waste as possible. But if you produce waste, make sure that it can be reused or recycled, and if that is not the case, then you have your residual waste. So we are talking about this residual waste. Now, we're talking about Flanders. So Belgium, you see the map here, I can show it. So Belgium, most of you are familiar probably with Belgium, is a small country. It's 9 times smaller in surface area compared to Ecuador, for instance. 9 times smaller. We have about 11 million residents, so it's very densely populated. And then we have 3 regions here. You have the upper region here, the Flemish region. Then you have this blue dot in the middle. This is the Brussels capital region, it's a separate region. And then you have the green one, which is the Walloon region. 3 regions. I mention this because in Flanders, it are the regions who are responsible for managing or for making up the waste policy. It's a regional competency. So they decide which flows should be collected separately and which not. But, and it's also important to know, it are also the municipalities who have a considerable amount of responsibility for the practical organization of collection of waste. They decide, of course, within the framework set up by the higher level, the regional authorities, they decide on the practical details. When do we collect which flow? Who is going to collect each flow? What is the price we charge for each flow? And so on and so on, as long as it's within the general rules which are set up with by the higher level environmental authorities, so on the regional level. So, if you go back 30 years in time to Flanders, for instance, what was the case for residual waste? Well, you just put it on the curbside and it was collected. And you pay a little bit of money, but it's just some kind of tax that is completely independent of the amount that you put on the curbside. Just every family pays a lump sum fee. It can be different according to some family characteristics, but in the end, it is independent of the amount of waste that you put on the curbside. So if you produce lots of waste or only just a little bit, you pay the same tax, the same waste tax. That was the old system. Since then, more and more, all municipalities switched to a variable system where you pay for each bag that you put on the curbside. This was, let's call it, a paper bag system. Actually, the system still exists with many municipalities. Just to give you an example, where I live in a small municipality, there is a paper bag system. So for each bag of residual waste that I put on the curbside, I have to pay €1.50. If it's a 60-liter bag, it's like this. It's not, so it's quite expensive. So €1.50. And how do they do it? Well, you have to buy the correct bag at the local store. If you don't put it in the correct bag, well, then they don't collect it. I'm sure you're familiar with these kind of systems, of course. So this is a system that is a step closer to what we call the polluter pays principle. You might have heard from this principle. It's a principle actually that says that, the one who is responsible for the pollution is also the one who has to pay for the consequences of the pollution. So, for instance, if you produce lots of waste, you have to pay for taking it away and processing the waste. That's the polluter pays principle in this case then. Now, it's a step closer, but it's still some kind of volume-based system. And since a little bit before the year 2000, municipalities start switching to what we call a weight-based pricing system. And that's what you see on this slide. So what is a weight-based pricing system? And some of you might know it already as well. In a weight-based pricing system, each family gets a personal container or a couple of personal containers. There is a chip in it, an identification chip, which is automatically read. And each time the container is collected and emptied, the chip is automatically registered. Container is then weighed before and after, and then you get a bill after 1 month, maybe after 2 months, sometimes after 6 months, and you get a bill for the exact amount in kilograms of waste that you have produced. And you understand? This is already another step closer to the polluter pays principle. You pay exactly for the amount of waste you have produced. Now, these are not new things. These things exist already a long time. But the interesting thing is to evaluate what the impact of these kind of policy measures are. And there it becomes, in my view, much more interesting as well. So, what do you see here on this graph? You see here on the horizontal axis the year, going from 96 to 2010. I chose this time frame because there are some interesting evolutions there. I have more recent data, but this is the more interesting time frame. On the vertical axis you have here percentage, on the other vertical axis you have here the amount of residual waste that is produced on average per capita per year, so per person per year, going from 0 to 200. So that's what here is. Now let's first have a look at this graph here with the triangles. This graph represents what we call the adoption rate, and this is the number, the percentage I should say, of municipalities using this weight-based pricing system. It goes from 0 until 2010 we were about 24%. This means that all the other municipalities, they use a classical system with a weight, with a price per bag, not a weight-based pricing system. Now, this is nothing special, of course, but what is interesting is that municipalities using this new system, they say that by introducing this new system, they reduce the amount of waste production by households. That's what they claim. But you might already see the mistake in this graph. They look, it's not a mistake in the graph, but a mistake that you can spot in the reasoning of these local policymakers that say, well, look at this graph, it has a very good impact. Well, they say, okay, and then we look at these two lines here. Let's start with the line, the dotted line here. This is actually nothing else than the municipalities using the system. And you see, indeed, in 2010, they produce less than the control group, but the axis and the control group are the municipalities using the other system. And they say, look, if you use the system, waste production diminishes. But probably some of you have already spotted a mistake here. If you look at, for instance, 96 and 97, none of the municipalities used the system, but at that time, the municipalities who were going to use the system were already below the municipalities using the other system. So this means that these two groups are not the same, they're not comparable. This means that introducing a weight-based pricing system is not independent of the amount of waste you produce. So just saying, look, we're like say 20 kilograms below the other group, that's a mistake. That's a mistake. So then the question is, how can we evaluate this correctly and don't make the mistakes some of the policymakers make when they see this kind of information. Now, a second graph, which is also interesting in my opinion, just another way of representing the data, is this one. Horizontal axis again, time, yes. Vertical axis again, waste that is generated. But here we only look at this group that used the system for the first time in 2006. And you see in 2006, indeed, the amount of waste that is produced drops. This is still the control group here. Then we did the same for municipalities using the system for the first time in 2008, and then for 2009. If you look at this graph, go a few times over them, you see a similar pattern. You see that there seems to be some kind of introduction effect, right? So what is the problem here? So pure from a methodological viewpoint speaking, treatment status, and treatment I mean participating at this new system of weight-based pricing is not randomized. These municipalities are not the same. And this is quite interesting, of course. Why are they different? Well, municipalities using the systems might be municipalities who have done in the past already much effort to reduce waste production. For instance, they introduce collection from door to door of green waste. So these municipalities already produce much less residual waste, and so on and so forth. Or maybe they are just more environmentally friendly residents, and so on. So you just cannot compare. So what is the solution? Well, I listed here some of the solutions we tried. I'm not going over them in detail, but there is a treatment effects model, there are matching estimators, there are different approaches, there are dynamic panel estimation techniques. Some of you probably know these kind of techniques. There are others as well, and we all applied them, and we came almost always to a very similar conclusion. I will skip this because I see that time is flying very fast. So let's go immediately to the next slide. So we found some results. First of all, and you saw it in the data already, and there seems to be some kind of introduction effect. You use this for the first time, the amount of waste drops. But if you look at the graphs very carefully, you see that this effect seems not to persist over time, right? It drops here and then, yeah, it's going up a little bit, but it's not very significant. But it seems that the difference is here very big, and then maybe it's here a little bit less. So it's not an effect that keeps on persisting after a while. So what we saw was that this effect indeed is not observed in the time after that, and there's no convincing evidence that it indeed remains after 5 years. This is one point, and the next point is about price elasticities, and the majority here are economists. So you know what price elasticities are, I assume? They say yes, okay. For those who are not familiar with price elasticities, put very simply and in the most basic form. So don't use this on your exam if there's asked something about price elasticities. But in their most basic form, price elasticity is a number without a dimension that actually says how much in a percentage express how much your outcome variable changes in a percentage if your price changes with 1%. For instance, if you have a price elasticity of, let's say, minus 0.5, this means that the price increases by 1%, that the demand, if we talk about demand, for instance, the amount of waste that is produced or put on the curbside increases, increases by 0.5%. That's basically it. And what we see is that these kind of things are rather priced inelastic. What does this mean? This means that in reality, if you increase the price of waste bags, for instance, that the impact is, in percentage terms, rather limited. So this is quite interesting. But what we do see is that these price elasticities are different between a weight-based pricing system and other systems. So quite interesting to learn. This was my first point. So if you would like to have more information, the things that I told you are actually based on some recent papers. One is published in 2021, another is an old paper, and there's also some ongoing research where we look at cross-price elasticities. I won't go into detail here, given that, we need some time. Well, I still have about 15 minutes, I assume? Yeah, okay. No, okay, I'm still on time. So this was the first point. Okay, then my question, I repeat it again, so before we go to the next part, is, okay, we had this, we see that there are some incentives, but the lessons that to be learned are here, if you do a correct evaluation, you use a correct evaluation technique, what you see is that, yeah, there seems to be an impact of these financial incentives. If you increase the price, the amount of waste will reduce. If you use a weight-based pricing system, that is close to the polluter-pays principle, and you see there's some kind of initial reduction or an introduction effect. But these effects are not as clear-cut as some people claim. Effects do not persist, elasticities are rather low, and so on and so forth. So, if you using these kind of financial incentives, it's not that easy. It's not that straightforward that they work that easy. And then if you ask people why do they sort their waste, why do they put, let's say, packaging waste correctly in a separate bag, why do they do that? Is it because it's cheaper? Is it because they have to do it? Or is it because they want to do it? And you see that all motives are mentioned. So, again, I return to my question. How should we, in the long run, make sure that these other kinds of motives that exist, how should we make sure that they do not disappear in the future? If you only have this financial incentive and you do not ask people anymore to sort, will they feel some kind of warm glow of doing something good for the environment? So that's the question to you. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know. But you can interrupt me, but we can have some time afterwards during the discussion as well. Okay, let's go to the next point. I'd like to talk about industrial waste. So the previous example was household waste. And if you look at the scientific literature, what you will see is that there are many papers evaluating environmental taxes or these kind of fees that I just explained for household waste. This is quite common. But if you look at industrial waste, you will find that the number of papers seems to be much less than the number of papers dealing with the household waste. So the question is, why is that the case? And I think some of the things have to do with data availability. If you have household waste, these data are often publicly available, of course. They have to report it, and you can download it, and you can analyze these figures. Now, in many countries, also companies producing waste, so industrial waste, they have to report it to the environmental authorities. I assume that there might be some similar laws in Ecuador as well. I'm not sure, but you know this better than me. But these data are not as easily publicly disclosed as the data for household waste. So this is one thing. And secondly, if you want to analyze the impact of a tax, for instance, an incineration tax, on the production of industrial waste, well, the thing is, if you look at the taxes, the fees that are for household waste, well, they are at the municipal level. So each municipality decides what the tax rate will be for a waste bag. I pay €1.50 for a bag, but I know that my neighbors who live actually 1 kilometer further than me just pay €1.15 for the same bag. That's a local decision. But if you look at decisions for incineration taxes, these are taken no longer locally, but often taken regionally. In Flanders, it's also a regional decision. So this means that you have actually one tax rate that goes for all the companies in Flanders. So you have much less variation in the price levels compared to the household taxes. So this could also be a reason, but still, it's very interesting to analyze these kind of things. So if you look at the few papers who have analyzed these kind of things already, you see that there's no consensus on what the impact of these kind of taxes is. And I have also a question related to this for you guys as well. So there's no consensus. So typically, such a tax, an incineration tax, or maybe tax on landfilling, they are instated because, well, local policymakers say, okay, we want that companies producing waste, that they don't produce waste that will be incinerated or landfill, but we want that if they produce waste, that they recycle it, or even we want that they reduce their waste production. So if they produce waste that is incinerated or landfilled, they will pay a tax. This is often the official reasoning behind these kind of taxes. Now, there's no consensus yet that these kind of taxes indeed make this shift happening from incinerated waste or landfilled waste to more recycling or even less waste generation. Some papers do find some evidence, others don't find such an evidence. But again, the number of papers is rather limited. And of course, and you understand this, background conditions do matter. You cannot just compare company A with company B if they work in a different industry, if they have different production processes, and so on and so on. So this makes it very difficult to estimate. But okay, let's just look at one example for Flanders, but then the question is, do you have similar taxes in Ecuador, and what is the purpose of this taxes? Is it indeed to make this shift happen, that companies have a more environmentally friendly use of their waste, or is it just for budgetary reasons? So I hope that you can give me an answer later on. So this is the case of Flanders, and we look at an incineration tax on waste with high caloric value. In reality, the main flow that is subjected to this kind of tax is hard plastics. Hard plastics are, if they're not recycled, they're incinerated, and they fall under the system with taxes with high caloric value. So what happens in France included in the price that the companies producing the waste have to pay to the recyclers or to the treatment companies, of course. If you have a look at how this tax looks in Flanders for this high caloric waste incineration, it looks like this. So here you have on the horizontal axis time going from 2005 to 2018. And what do we see? Well, there are some jumps in the tax rate, but apart from these jumps, there's not much variability. And this alone, I think, is already a very interesting thing to analyze. If you ask the environmental authorities how they came up with these tax rates, now they say, well, we design our taxes in such a way that we incentivize that companies do the right thing and preferably reduce their waste production, but if they produce waste, that is then recycled. Well, if you look at this tax rate, this seems not 100% the case, of course. This seems to me, but I hope you have more information on that, how this goes in Ecuador, it seems to me it's more a budgetary decision. You say, okay, we have to increase it here because we need more budget. Maybe we decrease it a bit. I'm not sure, maybe there was a strong lobby group. In any case, if you look at this, it's about 11, 12 euros, 13 euros, here 8 euros. It's corrected for inflation. So you see the small numbers behind the comma. So, but what you see here, it's a rather low number because the gate fee, the price that you pay to the company to incinerate 100 ton of this plastic waste is about 100 euros. And the tax rate, well, here is only 8 euros. So it's a small tax only, right? So this is already one observation. So the next question is, how can you evaluate what impact of these taxes is on the amount of waste that is produced? And here's the amount of plastic waste, hard plastic waste that is produced by the companies. What we did was we looked at panel data, we collected information on companies, we collected information on the backgrounds of the companies, how many people work there, how is the management looking, I mean, how big is the management, what is their how many profit do they have, what is all other figures that are typically available for companies. So we combined this with all firm information, but also with the tax, and we looked what the impact of the tax was in a regression framework. So on potential impact, it's more a relation that we estimate. So what the relation was between the tax and the amount of waste that such a company is going to produce. So, what were some of the findings that we found here? Well, first of all, we are in the group that finds some evidence that these incineration taxes make sure that prices indeed, the amounts indeed reduce. Although we have to be careful because if you look at this, there's not much variation. So 100% sure we cannot be, of course. But there's much variation in the companies, so we have some variation there. So it's not the final result yet, of course. So the discussion is still open. I hope that maybe you can use other data sets to find other empiric evidence supporting this or saying that it's not true. So we hope to find a good solution in the future, of course, because it's important to know with this, if these taxes indeed have an impact or not. Believe me, environmental authorities do want to know this. They do want to know if their tax rates have an impact or not. Okay, good. Let's go to the next point. Now, we found that a decreasing incineration tax rate had not a big impact. So we expected if the tax rate decreases, okay, the amount of waste produced will go up again. On this data set, at least, we found no evidence for this, which makes us doubt a little bit about, of course, the first observation. Could it be coincidence, or is something else going on there? So this was kind of an interesting observation here. And then we found also that, firm-specific variables do have an impact on the amount of waste, but this is, of course, what is expected. I see it's almost time. Do you have time to say something about benchmarking as well, or should I start the discussion?
Very quickly.
Very quickly, something about benchmarking. Okay. And then I'll let you go to your next seminar or to your next classes, of course. So, okay, this is based on this. The next question is, why should we benchmark how regions or cities are doing in terms of waste management? And why should we do this? Well, there are different reasons, but in reality it happens constantly. And you always check, is my city doing better than other cities? And why is my city doing better or worse than another city that is comparable? So there are different methodologies available. We did analysis on regional and provincial level data. And what we did was, well, we tried to combine different sub-indicators into one composite indicator. So what is a composite indicator? Actually put very simply, again, don't use this on your exam because it's a simplification, but you combine the information of different sub-indicators into one indicator, which results in one value for each municipality or one value for each region, whatever you are looking at, and this means that you can rank your regions or your municipalities. Now, what were the sub-indicators? They are listed here in our example. I won't go over them. There were some background conditions that also have an impact on that, and so on. I won't go over them because I don't have time. But there's one thing I want to say is, yeah, if regions are evaluated, and they say, okay, all these indicators will be combined into one indicator, but we must decide which one of these sub-indicators has a higher weight in finding this one composite indicator, yeah, then you understand that municipalities say, well, I'm very good at this sub-indicator, so I want this to have a big impact on big weight it is when we calculate the composite indicator. Also will say, yeah, I'm good at this one, so this should be important. And the same goes for somebody who's good in recycling, for instance. So you see, there's often no consensus on how these composite indicators should be composed and what the relative weights will be of all these sub-indicators. And of course, you can blame the municipalities or the cities or the regions that they want things that they are good in, that they have a larger weight. So what we do is we use an existing technique, benefit of the doubt technique. It's not our invention, but we tailored it that it could be used here. It could be combined with background conditions. It could be combined with other things. Well, not me, but the colleague did it, of course, and tailored it could be used in this context as well. What is the benefit of the doubt system? Well, put very simply again, it's you calculate a composite indicator with a set of weights, so a set of weights for these indicators, in such a way that each municipality or each region that you're evaluating attains the highest score. So you determine the best set of weights for each municipality or for each region, and then you compare this region with this set of weights that is optimal for your region to all others. So it's a relative set of weights for each region, for a relative set of weights that is optimal for each region, and then you can rank them. So, and you see that you get a ranking like this. The advantage of this, and I'm going over this very quickly, but this methodology is much more than what I just explained. It allows you to check who your peers are. In other words, to which city should we compare Cuenca, for instance? Should it be Quito? Should it be another city? Are these cities comparable in background characteristics or not? And then if you find comparable cities, comparable peers, which are the ones who have a similar background condition, are they outperforming us or not? When they are outperforming us, okay, then we're doing not as good as possible. And then we can benchmark against only the peers that are relevant to us. And this can be very instructive on which our strong points are and which our weak points are. So this is a plea for using these kind of methodologies, because many of you will, of course, have leading functions in the future. I mean, I'm looking at the students, of course. In the future, we'll have leading functions. We'll maybe work in administrations, or maybe will be decision makers in the field. So I hope that you are in favor of using these kind of relative benchmarking techniques. So I hope you have many questions. I raised 2 already for you guys, so I hope you have some questions or maybe answers to my questions. So I will conclude here and hope that we can start the discussion right now. Thank you. So questions or answers to my questions are very, very welcome. I will repeat otherwise my question. So the first question was related to incineration tax. Do you have an incineration tax here? How is it used? Is it used to indeed steer companies in the right direction, or is it just used as a budgetary measure? And what do you think? How should tax look like? And then the first question was about how can we retain these warm glow social values when doing recycling. I mean, in countries in Belgium, for instance, because these are one of the things that I learned when being here. So. You want to translate it first?
Yeah, we're going to be able to read it for some and then we can start a discussion. Sí. Bueno, antes que nada, muchísimas gracias por participar de esta ponencia. Simplemente vamos a señalar los key points que han destacado de la ponencia de Simon y un poco luego podríamos dar un pequeño espacio de discusión. Simon nos ha mostrado tres conceptos importantes. El primero tiene que ver con los procesos de recolección y las metodologías que estos se plantean en un país como es Bélgica, en sus 3 regiones. Segundo, hemos visto un proceso de análisis sobre lo que viene a ser un impuesto a la incineración de los residuos, lo cual es la forma en la cual se tratan los residuos en Bélgica para un proceso de recuperación y de aprovechamiento energético. Y finalmente hemos visto estos indicadores de comparación entre las distintas regiones en base a los procesamientos que pueden dar sobre sus residuos, ¿no? En el primer punto, cuando hablamos de un proceso de gestión de residuos, lo que Simon nos explicaba es que inicialmente en Bélgica y puntualmente en su región, la forma en la cual se gestionaba había un cobro por ello es un valor que se ponía sobre cada bolsa de residuos. Esto simplemente es como si nosotros tuviésemos aquí en el Ecuador o aquí por parte del EMAC un valor por cada funda celeste o cada funda negra que nosotros sacamos al momento de disponer de nuestros residuos, y puntualmente nos ha dicho que el costo de esto era de 1,50 €. ¿Sí? Sin embargo, hubo una transición tecnológica hacia lo que viene a ser un proceso de cobro por peso, en el cual a través de la implementación tecnológica lo que se tiene son contenedores específicos que ya pueden codificar a quién pertenece en este contenedor, y en base al peso que estos recuperan pues se impone un valor o una tasa. Lo que parecía interesante de estas implementaciones en la gestión de residuos es que a medida que el precio subía, lo que se notó inicialmente o durante los primeros 5 años fue que la tasa de producción per cápita de residuos en los hogares, que se generaban por persona o en los distintos hogares, disminuía. Es decir, el cobro tenía un resultado eficiente en que se reduzcan estos valores. Sin embargo, después de 5 años, pese a que había inclusive variaciones en los precios, esto ya se mantuvo, es decir, se conservaba la producción per cápita. Y aquí parte una de las primeras preguntas que nos hace Simon a nosotros, que es cómo esto, o cómo, si es que inclusive se contaría con una mayor implementación tecnológica que ya realice un proceso de clasificación y demás, ¿qué ocurriría con estos procesos de producción de residuos? Y segundo, ¿qué pasa con este componente social? Aquí es interesante lo que Simon nos plantea, ¿no? De que él ha podido notar aquí en el país cómo existe un componente social y una cultura ambiental que va dirigida hacia estos procesos amigables o causar un impacto amigable con el medio ambiente. Sin embargo, ¿qué consideran ustedes que ocurriría en la medida en la cual la tecnología permita avanzar en esto? ¿Qué pasaría con este componente social? ¿Qué pasaría con este componente ambiental por parte de los ciudadanos? Segundo, hay un componente interesante que era el proceso de impuestos que se implementaban ya aplicado a la industria en la generación de sus residuos, y puntualmente analizábamos el caso de la industria del plástico, el cual de igual forma, a medida que aumentó este impuesto, había un proceso de reducción por parte de los impuestos generados de la producción generada desde el sector industrial. Otra vez es interesante poder generar una extrapolación a lo que viene a ser el contexto latinoamericano y mucho más aterrizado aquí, con cómo esto de alguna forma también se puede aplicar. Nosotros no tenemos un sistema de generación, de quema para aprovechamiento o producción energética. Ustedes saben que el sistema en Cuenca es un sistema de relleno sanitario. Estamos más dirigidos hacia el entierro de estos residuos. Sin embargo, lo que decía Simon era interesante, ¿no? Que no era tan simple como establecer un impuesto, sino que era la relación que había entre la producción de una industria y el precio, no se podía equiparar. Era como necesitamos hacer este análisis un poco más puntualizado por cada industria y no hay cómo generar una regla general a todo el sector industrial. Eso creo que de cierta forma también nos genera una lección si es que pensáramos en estos sistemas aplicados a la industria local, cómo se lo podría generar. Y finalmente, estos indicadores que nos puso en su tercer punto, que permite a las localidades generar indicadores de cómo pueden ser más aprovechables en la medida en la cual aprovechan o le dan una disposición que no sea netamente la quema para la obtención energética, sino cuando hablamos de indicadores que permitan saber qué municipalidades tienen un mayor proceso de reciclaje, cuál tiene un mayor proceso de compostaje y cómo estos indicadores permiten una comparación entre las distintas regiones. Lo cual creo que también sería súper importante, ya que si lo vemos de cara a, otra vez, nuestro contexto, aquí lo que nos pasa es que no podemos realmente generar comparaciones de la disposición de residuos y las distintas metodologías de aprovechamiento que estos tienen entre las distintas municipalidades, o podríamos hablar inclusive si hablamos del nivel zonal, tampoco tenemos este tipo de indicadores. Por lo tanto, creo que eso he intentado resumir lo que han sido los distintos puntos de Simon. Y ahora yo también repito pues un poco esto de las preguntas que él nos ha planteado, que es, en primer lugar, ¿qué consideramos que puede ocurrir con estos componentes sociales y ambientales que de alguna forma se promueven desde los procesos de clasificación? Yo le sumaría una pregunta más a esto: ¿cómo creen que resultaría imponer un impuesto aquí en la ciudad de Cuenca, por ejemplo, por funda de basura? Que es algo que actualmente no tenemos, ¿sí? Si es que resultaría, no resultaría, y ahí tengo a la profesora que me está alzando la mano, así que le escucho.
Felicitaciones al profesor y a la organización de este evento. Muy interesante el tema. Quiero preguntar, nosotros pagamos una tasa por recolección de basura. ¿Puede ser asimilable al impuesto? Primera cosa. Segundo, ¿cómo es que ustedes midieron el impacto que genera la incineración de residuos?
Can you translate for you? The first question is that in Ecuador, and especially in Cuenca, we pay payment for the generation of waste, and we pay for this to the municipality. If we can consider this as a task, similar to the task that you have in Belgium. And the second question is that how you evaluate the indicators of the incineration task, what was the methodology to calculate this indicator?
Okay, thank you for this question. So the first one, the tax that you mentioned, if I got it correctly, it's also a lump sum tax that has to be paid to the municipal authorities, I assume, and it's independent of the amount of waste that you produce, but it can be depend on other characteristics of the household, maybe, or maybe on the amount of water you produce, you use. Yeah, it is similar to some of the existing taxes we have, and some of the taxes some municipalities still have. So still, some municipalities have what we call a waste tax, and they just pay at the municipality a sum each year. Often it's, let's say, less than 50 euros per family, per household per year. And the idea is that it's used to finance waste treatment, waste collection, and so on and so forth. But it's always in combination with a variable fee that depends on the amount of waste that you put on the curbside. It's never only this tax. So some municipalities still have it. It's always complemented with this variable fees, the price per bag, weight-based pricing, the price per container, and so on. So yes, it's similar, but it's complemented in our case. And then the second question was about the methodology used.
Just before I forget, sorry.
Bueno, en el caso de su pregunta de que tenemos algo similar en Ecuador, dice que sí, podría ser algo similar, sin embargo en Bélgica siempre va complementado de este impuesto variable de cuánto uno genera. Entonces, siempre se considera el peso, supongo por kilos, ¿verdad?
Per kilogram or per bag.
Okay.
Yeah.
Entonces siempre consideran el peso de los residuos que generan para tener este impuesto que puede ser variable para las diferentes familias. Sin embargo, lo que nosotros tenemos acá sí puede ser similar en ciertos municipios, pero complementado con esto. Okay.
And then the second question, what methodology we used for the incineration tax evaluation. So we used there a dynamic panel data regression technique. Yeah, I'm not sure how to translate that.
I'm not sure.
It's a dynamic panel data regression technique that we used.
Okay.
So, sorry.
Okay, ¿es algún tipo de metodología como
It's a regression technique, yeah.
como una técnica de regresión que usan para este cálculo de
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
Para el cálculo de los residuos?
And I forgot to mention something earlier. So these very nice slides here, this one and this one, they were made by a very brilliant PhD student of me who already finished her PhD, but all credits go, of course, to Carolina Viña, who is also author of one of these papers, so I forgot to mention it.
Okay, bueno, aquí solo hacer un espacio para mencionar que todos estos gráficos y las presentaciones, las imágenes, las ilustraciones que se mostraron fueron realizadas por esta persona, Lavín, sí. Ajá, que es del grupo de investigación del profesor, entonces también todo eso se puede encontrar en este estudio. Okay,
So just let me conclude. So if you have any comments on the questions I have asked, of course you're welcome to discuss this with me during coffee or afterwards. You don't have to do it publicly, of course.
Aquí el profesor tenía una pregunta bastante... El profesor tenía una pregunta bastante interesante al inicio que nos hizo, es justamente esto, ¿no? Él nos muestra las experiencias que han tenido en Bélgica, pero también ha visto las experiencias que se tienen en Ecuador. Entonces, como también lo mencionó Damián, un poco es esto de el orgullo que sienten los recicladores, las personas que separan la basura al hacer algo bueno por el ambiente. Saben que están haciendo algo bueno y se sienten bien con eso. Entonces, en lugar de tratar de implementar lo que está pasando y todos estos sistemas y tecnologías de Europa, implementarlo acá en Ecuador, también deberíamos preguntarnos cómo podemos hacer al revés. O sea, que nosotros, que este orgullo que sienten las personas, lo sientan las personas allá también, porque ellos hacen algo y no porque el sistema les hace todo. Entonces, por ejemplo, acá si venimos e implementamos lo que hacen allá y decimos no separen su basura, pongan todo en una sola funda, porque hay una tecnología que les hace toda la separación. Entonces, ¿dónde queda esa parte social? ¿Dónde queda ese, no sé, el significado que tiene para uno hacer algo bueno y sentirse bien con eso? Entonces, creo que esa es una de las preguntas que también se espera si podemos discutir aquí un poco, de cómo podríamos hacer que eso no desaparezca.
Yo tengo una pregunta. La voy a hacer en español para que me entiendan y luego le traduzco. Aquí en Cuenca y en Ecuador específicamente nosotros cobramos la tasa, el fee que pagamos por los residuos a través de la factura de la energía eléctrica. Hemos hecho algunos análisis y hemos visto que cuando esto se conecta con otro tipo de servicios, por ejemplo, hay una tasa muy alta de mora, es decir, la gente no paga. Es decir, no hay mucha motivación tampoco a pagar, salvo que esté conectada con la energía, y la energía luego de 3 meses que uno no paga lo corta. Entonces, mi consulta, Simon, es si ustedes tienen alguna experiencia con el tema de cómo hacer que la gente pague por la gestión de los residuos. Ustedes tienen taxes, nosotros pagamos por lo que cuesta gestionar el residuo. Nosotros pagamos eso, no es concebido tal cual como un impuesto. Y mi otra pregunta tiene que ver, los impuestos tienen esta lógica de que estamos castigando a algo o a alguien porque está haciendo algo y tiene que pagar algo adicional. ¿Ustedes han hecho algún estudio con respecto, en cambio, a incentivos, a cosas, en cambio, positivas, para ver cómo la gente más bien reacciona y cuál es el comportamiento en términos de incentivos para mejorar la gestión de los residuos?
Ok, voy a ir con la segunda antes de ver que tengo ahorita más fresco. So the second question is like, if we put taxes on people, this is like something to punish them because they're doing something bad. Or it seems like something like that. But do you have something, not to punish them, but something like a gift or something like an incentive? Yeah, because they're doing something good and not because they're doing something bad. So it's like the other way around of, yeah.
Yes, that's actually the question, and we're looking for this kind of things. So pure from an economic viewpoint, you can tax or you can give subsidies, but that's pure economic. Yeah. And we're not looking for that, we're also looking for the psychological effect. And there, yeah, some kind of positive incentive that is not a pecuniary incentive, so not a financial incentive, would be great, but I must be honest, we don't have it. But it would be great to have something like this, of course, yeah, absolutely. So any suggestion there is welcome, it's a very good remark, absolutely.
Yeah, the fifth question, Simon, was regarding here the people pay the fee for the treatment of the waste included in the bill of the energy.
Yes.
So if you, after 3 months, you don't pay, the energy is cut in your home, so the people pay. But in other municipalities, they include this in other type of service that are not cut in some period. So we have a lot of people that don't pay. Also, the municipalities subside the treatment of the waste. So my question was, do you have some suggestion how to work with the people in order to really pay the fee for the waste treatment?
So to make them pay, because that is the reason, right? They don't. Yeah, that's a difficult issue. How to make people pay? So, but the system you have is actually, yeah, if it's based on your water bill or your energy bill, it's not exactly a system where you pay a lump sum. And maybe I'm not sure. Let me just ask this question first: is this used in this way because you want that people who don't have much financial means and don't use too much energy because they don't have a very big castle or a villa, that they don't pay too much as well for waste treatment, or is that not the reason why it is coupled to your energy bill or your water bill?
Can I comment here? Well, I think that is the reason, because supposedly people who don't have money don't generate that much waste. However, there is a discussion there because it is paid through the energy bill, but like old fridges, old,
Exactly,
they actually consume more energy, and it's the poor people who have these.
Exactly,
So it's actually a contradiction, and poor people that do not generate that much waste are paid more because their energy bill is higher. So that's the reason supposedly, but it's wrong.
I was thinking exactly the same.
Yeah.
If you look at new building regulations that are going, that are evolving worldwide, they have like the energy neutral homes. These are quite expensive homes, and are often rich people who are able to buy this, and they don't pay then also the big fee for waste. So yeah, indeed. So the system apparently is not designed in such a way that those who can pay it should pay it, right?
But actually there is a kind of the formula to calculate the amount of money that you have to pay. It's connected with a kind of subsidy. So if I consume less, I pay less. So if I consume more, I pay more, because there are some studies that connect the amount of waste that you generate with the consume of energy. So actually there are subsidies, so it's not like that.
But the question in the end was then, how could we make them pay?
Motivate the people to really think that the treatment of waste is an issue, and we really have to do something, and we have to pay if we generate more waste.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't have an answer. If I have an answer, which go worldwide and explain. But it's very, very good question. I don't know. I just know how it works in Flanders. That there is, an important. There's a long evolution, of course, but there was a growing awareness that it's something you should do. But also, there is some enforcement over the years. And if you don't pay your tax, so if you don't put it in the right bag, for instance, they don't collect it. And then what you see is that there's often legal dumping going on. But this is also now more and more enforcement there that when they find the bag dumped, they don't pick it up and put it away. No, they